Majora's Mask was a peculiar game in all senses of the word. It was developed in approximately a year as a direct sequel to Ocarina of Time, which took 5 years to be ready. That was possible because Majora reuses the same engine, core gameplay, and many assets created for its predecessor, and also because Aonuma and his team put an insane work to finish development on time. And even so, it's fascinating that these two games are completely distinct experiences. Majora shuffles and reframes the elements from Ocarina to create something new. It feels like living in a parallel universe, seeing the same character models with different personalities and names, seeing familiar races in different places and contexts. It's a weirdness that the game embraces in its own narrative, elevating the coherence of the final product. A very clever example of problem solving. Well, let's jump 22 years in the future, and once again there's a direct sequel in development for Zelda, the sequel to Breath of the Wild, which we know has the same engine, assets, and at least partially the same worlds of its predecessor. But there's one big difference here. With the release date for 2023, the game will release after almost 6 years of development. Is that a bad thing? I don't think so. It's impossible to compare development nowadays to how it was in the early 3D generation, and knowing how massive Breath of the Wild already was, it's not difficult to imagine that a follow-up to that would be no easy work. But still, 6 years! How much of a difference or how much of an expansion we will actually see on this game? Well, before we discuss that, why not take a look at Nintendo's history with direct sequels? I'm referring specifically to those games that heavily rely on their predecessor from a technical standpoint. Games like I was just talking about Zelda and now I'm going to talk about Mario. What a cliche for a Nintendo channel. But truly, Super Mario Galaxy 2 is a great example for this video. The first Galaxy was an outstanding achievement for Nintendo, a 3D Mario more accessible than Mario 64 and more polished than Mario Sunshine, a game that brought a breath of fresh air to 3D platformers with a clever use of gravity in its level design. Of course it would be a good idea to expand on that, and thus Galaxy 2 was born, a sequel that brought more of what we already had, and that was awesome. Yes, Super Mario Galaxy 2 is more difficult, has more variety, and of course Yoshi, but from a general point of view, it works identically to its predecessor on gameplay, graphics, and physics. It's amazing cause, thanks to that approach, we received more Mario content in less than 3 years. It's a win-win situation for Nintendo and fans. The reception was just as good as the first one, showing that no one was asking for radical changes at that moment. To this day, it's not uncommon to see fans asking for a third Galaxy game. I mean, I wouldn't complain. Looking back at my first example in this video, it's interesting to see the differences in approach. Majora's knew that it couldn't beat Ocarina in 1 year, so it tried to be something structurally different, less obvious. Galaxy 2 on the other hand not only tried to replicate its older brother, but also added some new elements on top of it. Both games managed to be successful in their endeavors. I consider the two 64 Zeldas and the two Galaxies to be mirror sequels, because I can't say that the predecessor or the successor is objectively better or worse than the other. Majora's and Ocarina are successful following distinct paths, Galaxy 1 and 2 are successful following the same path. But on other series, we see a more common phenomenon, the better or the not as good sequel. Donkey Kong Country was good, but Donkey Kong Country 2 was awesome. Donkey Kong Country Returns was a cool revival, but Tropical Freeze was next level. I enjoy Phantom Hourglass, but Spirit's Track had a way better flow of gameplay. Metroid Prime was outstanding, and Echoes was really good, but not as good. Still really good. And Banjo-Kazooie is the purest form of fun, while Banjo-Tooie is the definition of why less is more. As a creator, the most exciting and hardest thing to do is to follow up a great work. It's exciting because you already got it right, you already know what works, and also you are probably aware of the things you have to correct thanks to feedback. However, it's also frightening, because what if you overcorrect things? What if people want something different this time? What if you can't surpass your best work yet? To be honest, I don't think creators should have those questions in mind while developing, because this is just anxiety speaking. But of course they are very true possibilities. Actually, there's a very common pitfall here. What if a series is providing too much of something and becoming stale? Well, Nintendo is not a good example in that department. They always strive for originality, for something new. Something new.
New Super Mario Brothers! Whee!
New Super Mario Bros., a series that was so good when it started that even Nintendo couldn't resist releasing more and more. It's hard to blame them when we compare the sales. They reuse assets, textures, musics, and animations in this series. It's the ultimate level of a direct sequel, but it worked pretty well for a while because the core gameplay was fantastic. It's 2D Mario after all. However, by the time that New Super Mario Bros. U came out, the situation changed. The new look of the series felt generic, the magic had worn out. The first game on the DS felt like a celebration, and it was weird to see the templates of a celebration being used in all 4 games of the franchise. Thankfully, Nintendo noticed that saturation and stopped before we had a FIFA on our hands, because it's been a while since the last new game. Could Splatoon fall into the same pitfall of the new series? I don't know, it's curious, we are heading for the 3rd game with a similar look and feel in the span of 7 years. But there's a catch, Splatoon is a multiplayer game, competitive players don't want to see big changes and there's always a new campaign for those who enjoy the single player mode. It's not that different from what other companies in the industry make with annual releases. Of course, Splatoon is not at that level, but it begs the question if you really need more than one of those per generation. Anyway, the 3rd game did not release yet, and to be honest, I'm quite excited for it. It's not fair to compare with what happened to New Super Mario Bros. Yet. Let's see how Nintendo handles things in the future. Well, we talked a lot about different sequels. It's curious to see the approaches that Nintendo has followed in the past, and it's almost impossible to see a pattern. The circumstances and the style of each game are usually what point to their decision. So, the sequel to Breath of the Wild, will it be more of the first one? Will it be different? Will it be better? A lot of people complain about weapon durability on Breath of the Wild. Should they change that? It's complicated because it's a mechanic closely related to the open nature of the game. And the story. Should we have a more linear adventure to provide better storytelling? And dungeons. Classic dungeons will come back? 6 years to answer all these questions. The conclusion that I want to arrive in this video is, the sequel to Breath of the Wild will probably be the biggest direct sequel that Nintendo has ever made. Years in the cooking, built on top of an already existing game. I have a guess that they are basically creating a whole new game inside the already existing Breath of the Wild. A game on top of a game. It sounds a little crazy, it's just a guess. But for real, I'm excited because the fact that they are taking so long in development makes me wonder how much new things they are creating, how they are testing the limits of what they already had. Anyway, that's enough speculation. That's it from me guys, thank you so much for watching, until next time, bye!